Hey folks, George here. Now we're going to start a new set of videos about articles and philosophers who are talking about the ethics and morality around animal concerns or environmental concerns. The first article that we're going to examine is by Peter Singer, entitled "All Animals Are Equal." He starts by suggesting that the principle of equality means equal consideration of interests. Equality means equal consideration of interests. Of course, many accept this already for humans, but there's no rational reason to limit this only to humans. However, many people question equal consideration to other species, like other animals. This, for Singer, reveals a very popular prejudice. And this prejudice is no better than those who prejudice white interests over black interests, or male interests over female interests, or heterosexual interests over homosexual interests. And the list goes on and on. We give equal interest to all different groups of human beings. So Singer says we should also give equal consideration to all other groups of beings that have interests. And that's not just human beings, right? Philosophy, Peter Singer says, and critical thinking require that we follow the arguments where they lead. Let's see where Singer wants to lead us with his arguments. He repeats, we are concerned with equal consideration of interests. A mere difference in race doesn't entitle anyone to exploit another person. A mere difference in intelligence doesn't entitle anyone to exploit another. So, a mere difference in species doesn't entitle anyone to exploit another species. This idea, of course, goes back to Bentham's utilitarianism. Peter Singer, of course, one of the foremost utilitarian thinkers alive today. The question, Singer reminds us, is not, can animals reason? Or, it's not, can animals talk? But the question is, can animals suffer? I hope we all take for granted that it's obvious that we can cause animals to suffer. The capacity for suffering and enjoyment is the prerequisite for having interests at all. What does that mean? A stone, for example, does not have interests. Why? Because a stone cannot enjoy existence. A stone cannot suffer when I kick it, right? Therefore, a stone does not have interests. But a mouse does have interests. A mouse does not want to suffer. How do I know? Because when you try to catch a mouse, it runs away from you, right? If a being or anything really can suffer, then there's nothing else to be taken into account. That is the most important capacity, according to Singer and his utilitarian his version of utilitarianism. Actually, I think all utilitarians would agree with this. Yes, the point is, how much suffering are we causing? Or how much happiness are we causing? Focusing and choosing on some other capacity like intelligence, let's say, or rational thinking. That choice to focus upon intelligence or rational thinking is an arbitrary choice. It's just as arbitrary as choosing skin color, for example, or gender, or sexuality, or any other number of arbitrarily irrelevant categories. According to Singer, to say that the suffering doesn't matter if it happens in another species is called being speciesist. If I don't care what another race considers to be their interests, then I'm called a racist. If I don't give equal consideration to the interests of another sex or gender, then I'm called a sexist. Well, Singer says, if you don't give consideration to the interests of other species, then you are a speciesist. By the way, let's slow down. Let's back up just a little bit here. Singer is not claiming that all other species and human beings are equal and should get all equal rights, right? He's not even suggesting that maybe humans suffer more than other species, right? He's not even saying that, but he is saying that animals do suffer something at least, don't they? And it's that suffering which is the important category that we should focus upon in our moral and ethical thinking. For example, we call it wrong if we cause a baby to suffer for no good reason. And so in the same vein, it should also be wrong if we cause an animal to suffer for no good reason. Now, here's where Singer starts to get into a little bit of trouble with some other thinkers out there, right? Because here's what he does suggest. If you do think that it's okay to make animals suffer for some reason, then guess what? For the same exact reason, it should also be okay to make babies suffer. So whatever reason you give for saying, well, it's okay to make animals suffer because of this. Well, Singer's going to say, well, given this exact same logic, we should be allowed to make babies suffer, human babies suffer, for this reason too. But if you don't want to let babies suffer for this reason, then we shouldn't let animals suffer for this reason either. To really bring home the controversy that Peter Singer raises. And he does get into a lot of trouble. A lot of people protest him because of lines like this and claims like this. He says that animals, babies, perhaps the severely mentally impaired, they're all beings that should be treated similarly, right? Now, I think you could probably predict how that gets him in trouble because let's say some people with family members who are severely mentally impaired. Did Peter Singer just say that my child who is severely mentally impaired should be held on the same standing as an animal? Right? Peter Singer says, whoa, wait a second, you're misunderstanding me. It's not exactly what I'm saying. It kind of is what I'm saying, but it's not exactly what I'm saying. What Peter Singer is trying to say is, wait a second, if we give certain respect and certain consideration to babies and the severely mentally impaired, then at least we should give animals the same consideration. So let me try to be a little bit charitable to Singer here and defend him for a quick second. What he's saying is he's not trying to diminish the value of babies and severely impaired human beings. Rather, he's trying to elevate the standing of animals to at least this standing, which we give significant considerations for the interests of this group of beings. Again, Peter Singer is not claiming that animal suffering is equal to human suffering. He's not saying that. Rather, what he's saying, by the way, it doesn't matter if there are differences in human suffering and animal suffering. What is important is that suffering in animals does exist. There is suffering in animals, and because there is some suffering, we, as moral beings, ought to work to diminish the suffering of these beings that can suffer. That's all he's saying. Now, Peter Singer does see a difficulty with his ideas here. I don't think he believes it's difficulty, but he sees that there's kind of a workaround here. Okay, go with me here. He's talking about causing suffering in animals. That is wrong. But what if we just kill the animal without suffering? Would that be wrong? Peter Singer recognizes, ooh, that's a lot more complicated, isn't it? That's a lot more complicated. He does believe that humans have a right to life. Why do humans have a right to life? Because of all of our rational capacities, right? We look forward to the future. We value our future life, right? And taking away that future life is wronging me. It's complicated to ask the question, do animals value their future life? Do animals think about their future? Do animals plan for the future? Again, that's very complicated, and Singer doesn't want to quite go there, right? The science, let's say, isn't quite in on how intelligent and how rational and how much animals plan for the future, right? So let's put that question aside for a quick moment, yeah? That is a difficult problem. However, let's recall that this problem is not difficult. Animals do suffer. Animals do suffer. Thus, we should, as moral beings, work to diminish the suffering of beings that can suffer. Do animals have a right to life? That's very complicated. I'm not sure. Let's ask that question at a later date. But at least we should all grant that animals do have something like a right to not suffer without a very, very good reason. So what does all of this mean for you and me? Well, for some of us, we eat the flesh of dead animals. That puts into question the ethics of eating animals, doesn't it? Especially if it's a luxury. Especially if it's a luxury. What do I mean by luxury? Do you really need to eat animals to get the nutrition that animals give? Right? Some people would say, well, you can eat things like beans. Beans, by the way, and other plants don't suffer. Why don't they suffer? Because, to suffer, you need something like a nervous system. I don't know what it means to suffer without a nervous system. I don't know what pain even means without a nervous system, right? So beans don't suffer. So if you could get the same nutrition from beans as you can from an animal whom you cause to suffer, then which of these two choices causes the least suffering? Eating beans or eating animals? Well, clearly eating beans causes less suffering because you stop the suffering of animals, whereas beans don't suffer when you eat them. Thus, as a luxury, eating animals must be put into ethical doubt, right? Most of us can survive just fine without eating animals. Now, he does acknowledge that there are some people around the world who have to hunt and kill animals because of where they live, because of how they live, in order to live. For example, there are places around the world where you can't grow beans, let's say in the far north, where it's all ice. And there are certain groups and communities where, I'm sorry, there's no farmland here. I can't grow beans. So we need to hunt animals, let's say whales or seals or things like that, in order to get my nutrition, the necessary nutrition. In that case, there's a good reason to make those animals suffer. That is, I need to make this animal suffer to survive because of the world I live in, right? But I live in New York City, right? I could go to the store and buy all sorts of food that doesn't cause animals to suffer. So for me, the ethical thing to do, according to Singer, is to refrain from eating animals because eating animals causes them to suffer. I don't have a good reason to not eat meat, according to Singer. Perhaps if you live in the far north, in these icy tundras, where they don't have access to certain foods, then they have a good reason to hunt animals. But not me. And let's question how certain people in the northern tundras harvest animals. They usually kill them as quickly as they can, right? But what about the food that I eat? What about the meat that is at my local grocery store around the corner? Anybody who knows just a little bit about factory farming and the way that meat is harvested and generated in our factory farming system would know that that system, that industry, causes a lot of animal suffering. With that in mind, let's step away from eating animals to experimenting on animals. What about experimenting on animals? Okay, might there be a good reason to experiment on animals? Yes, experimenting on animals is causing them to suffer, but some people say, certain scientists say, it will be justified because it relieves more suffering than it causes in the animals. After all, shouldn't we make a few animals suffer in order to save thousands of human lives? By the way, I love that argument because Singer reveals himself to be just a classic utilitarian. Wait, might it be okay to cause a little bit of suffering over here if we could diminish the suffering of so many other human beings over here, right? We're weighing the suffering. And what some people will claim is that animal experiments cause a bit of suffering, just a little bit of suffering over here in order to relieve a lot of suffering over here. Okay, great. However, Singer looks at this evidence and says it's wrong. This evidence is just wrong. These tests, according to Singer, are unnecessary to stop human suffering. Right? These tests just are not very effective at diminishing human suffering. They're not necessary. They're not needed. If we could do things another way, we should do things another way without causing the animals to suffer. But let's consider for a second, even if they were true. Okay, fine. Maybe it's true. But then recall the earlier example. If it is true that causing an animal to suffer over here could relieve the suffering of so many humans, maybe if that were true, would you do the same thing if you were causing a baby to suffer? Would you be willing to substitute a baby, a human baby, or a severely mentally impaired human being? Many of us would say, no way. No way. And Singer says, well, if you say no way to a baby or a severely mentally impaired human being, then you should say no way to an animal too. Singer recognizes some counter arguments, and he addresses them. The first argument that he addresses is, what about animals? They kill each other. If animals could kill each other, then we should be able to kill animals, right? That's an odd way to look at morality, to look at how animals behave. Is that really what you want to do for your morality? Let's look at what lions do. And I want to act just as morally as a lion. Come on. Animals do all sorts of terrible things. I don't want to live like a lion. Forgive me. Even still, it is impossible to hold animals morally responsible. Why? Because they need it. A lion needs to kill a gazelle in order to survive, for its nutrition. Furthermore, animals don't have the capacity for rational thinking like humans do. Furthermore, this is an example of the naturalistic fallacy. Just because it happens in nature doesn't mean it's right. Yes, something might be natural. You can't, however, get an ought. You ought to do this because it is this way. That's called the naturalistic fallacy. Another counter-argument that Singer addresses is people who say, wait, you even said animals don't have reason. They don't have the capacity to think. They don't have real autonomy. They don't have self-consciousness. Fine, Singer says. But remember, none of that is really important. That's not the important thing here. This assumption that things with reason and self-consciousness and autonomy, like humans, to say that these things, the suffering that these things experience is prioritized, that's just speciesist, isn't it? The qualities of reason, self-consciousness, autonomy, those are all morally arbitrary, just like the qualities of race, gender, sexual preference. Those are morally arbitrary categories, that we don't exploit things for, and in the same way, intelligence, rational capacity, autonomy, self-consciousness, those are also morally arbitrary categories. Okay, again, just to push back against those who find Singer's claims very controversial and ableist, some people might say. Again, Singer does not want to mistreat babies or the severely mentally impaired. He doesn't want to mistreat those people. Rather, he wants to elevate animals and the consideration of animals to the same consideration that we give to babies and the severely mentally impaired. He doesn't want to diminish anybody's considerations. By the way, some people might say, wait, I love my children, my babies. I love my mentally impaired family members so much more than I love animals. Singer says, God bless you. Go for it. Love them. Love them more. But that should not be the source of our moral consideration. By the way, that argument would work for racism, wouldn't it? I love people that look like me more than people that don't look like me. That sounds like a very racist argument, doesn't it? And so to say that I love my babies or my family members who are severely mentally impaired more than I love animals, therefore I can abuse animals and make animals suffer? No way, Singer would say. The last moral counter-argument that Singer considers is the claim that we need a nice, neat line to know what we can eat and what we can't eat, right? We need that neat line. Singer says, yeah, wherever you want to draw that line, though, is going to be completely arbitrary and irrelevant. We don't want to base our moral and ethical considerations on something so arbitrary. I hope now we understand Singer's ideas a little bit more about giving much more moral consideration to animals in light of the fact that they do suffer. And I will repeat this just one more time. Singer is not proposing that we diminish the respect and consideration that we give to babies or the severely mentally impaired. Rather, he wants to elevate the moral considerations that we give to things like animals. See you next time. Bye-bye.